An essential part of the pull factors of sales communication and demographic analysis is your ability to predetermine the client's ability to pay. The last thing that you want to do is to invest the time, talent, and resources to identify your demographics, to identify your psychographics, only to recognize that the client themselves are not able to pay. This is one of the reasons why we hosted the last program and we gave a high level overview of the cost of doing business. In spite of this, the research is showing that we have millions of businesses that are starting every year without taking that time to truly understand the cost of doing business. Now, there's a lot of statistics that I'm going to be surfacing today, which says that in spite of the fact that those businesses are starting, they should not be trivialized. And the ability to identify your demographic ability to pay is not as cut and dry as most might want to believe it is. Now, I'm going to be looking at some US statistics here, and I believe it's important for you to have this type of information. In the United States of America alone, we have in excess of 32.5 million small businesses that are there in the US, and they account for about 99.9% of businesses. That's a very, very large number. Now, in the US, again, this is one of the reasons why we can't trivialize this. These are businesses and they play a very pivotal role in the economic development of the country. It must also be noted that US small business account for about 1.5 million jobs annually. And that's a very big number. So let's break down this analysis just a little bit here to ensure that you have a fair degree of clarity of what we are discussing here today. Now, funding sources can come from a number of places. And based on the fact that in the US, they have so much of businesses that are playing such a pivotal role in economic development, it's important to really make this a serious study. Now, funding sources or payment method can come from company owners' ability to pay, and we will examine that shortly. Payment method can come from government sponsors, payment method, or it can come from creative financing payment method. So these are three areas that we're going to cover today. Has an entrepreneur who's involved in the sales communication process and looking at specific demographic targeting, these are important information that you want to pay attention to. Now, in the case that the company in itself would have done its due diligence, meaning that they understand the total cost of doing business and to take practical steps to ensure that the business is in that position of strength to handle its own financing. Those are the type of businesses that might leverage the financial market. And in previous program, we did look at five types of financial markets. We look at debt capital market, we look at the equity capital market, we look at the credit capital market, hard money lenders, and creative financing. Now, there's a number of businesses that are set up and they will seek after their own financing. Those that are doing that due diligence, those that are taking the time to understand the real cost of doing business, they are one, ensuring that the business is fundable, and two, that they are connecting with funding sources in order to fund the vision of that business that they're in. But of course, I would have said you still have millions of businesses, in spite of those that are doing the starting business in the right way, that will not start things in the right way. Many persons will make an emotional decision to get into business. Many may underestimate the gravity of getting into business, and in that process, they may start. You still want to have some focus on them because the fact that they themselves may not position themselves to leverage debt, equity, credit, creative financing, or hard money lending, they're still funding sources. And you, as an independent contractor, can connect with the funding sources in order to provide support to those businesses who would not have done the due diligence. For example, you have government sponsored payment method. What exactly does this mean? And I'm going to look at a few methods that government would use in terms of giving support to the millions of businesses that are established in the US. For example, and of course, this is not restricted to the US. The analysis that I'm giving is not restricted to the US only. But for example, there is government grant, and every year there are budgetary allocation by the federal government to help small businesses. And as I would have established early on, in the US today, we have in excess of 32.5 million small businesses. And that number continue to increase. So grant funding is a source of funding that small businesses can tap into. Now, these small businesses can tap into this independently, or perhaps you, as an independent contractor who are providing specific products or services to small businesses, you can be a middleman. You can be a bridge between federal agencies and private sector in terms of ensuring that the small businesses are given the support that they need to grow, scale, and make impact and continue to create massive amount of employment in the US, bringing down poverty, contributing to economic, stimulation, and pushing the economy forward. So there, that option that is open. There's also what we call a government revolving fund. Now, in some countries, what government may do, they may establish a revolving fund, and that revolving fund might be hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, or perhaps billions of dollars. And businesses, small businesses, are able to tap into that fund, leverage that fund in terms of getting their business properly set up to make impact. Now, again, with these revolving funds, you as a middleman, you as a subcontractor, you can access these funding in an effort of helping the small businesses. So these are options that are open to you when we are looking at the specific demographics and their ability to pay. Their ability to pay is not only dependent on the business owners themselves' ability to access debt, equity, credit, creative financing, or hard money lending. There are other funding sources, and you need to be aware of them because this can be another avenue in which you are using to increase the business potential to cash flow. Of course, I would have said at the beginning of this program, the last thing that you want to do is to do your demographic analysis, psychographic analysis, geographic analysis, and not take into consideration the client's ability to pay. What we're going through here is the various options that are available that can enable the clients to pay you. The client may themselves may not even know of all these options. You need to know so you can table these solutions to your client. We also have what is known as the government and tax rebate. Now, what we see happens in some countries in relation to this, very often you find micro, small, even big businesses would say that interest rates is very high. So what some government agencies would do is to substitute the interest rates. Let's take, for example, the interest might be 6%, and the government might say, okay, they're going to pay 4% of the cost per capital. And you, the entrepreneur, the business owner, you will pay 2%. That is a significant input into reducing the costs for capital. All right. So we have seen governments across in some parts of the world would have leveraged these techniques. Now, this presents tremendous opportunities for business owners to access these capital. Now, the ability to access these capital will largely depend on the business fundability. The business has to be set up in a proper way. The business has to have historical financial data. The business has to have, the cash flow game plan, and these types of stuff you need to have in place. Now, again, this goes to my earlier argument. There are many persons out there that are saying that you don't necessarily need the cash flow projection. You don't necessarily need the business strategic plan. But of course, to access these type of funding, you need to have your record properly in place. In the absence of having your records in place, these funding institutions are not going to, give you a wink. They're not going to give you a wink. So I believe it's utter, well, you can complete that sentence. When we hear, that kind of statements that is being made, that you don't need, financial data, you don't need your business strategic plan and that type of stuff. All right. So this is another option open for funding. The fourth concept that I want to look at is economic development fund. Now, we have economic development fund, and we see how this worked in Canada many years ago. They had a particular focus to stimulate economic activities in a particular area of doing business. So what the government would have done, they collaborated with financial institutions, they collaborated with universities, and then they give a shout out to businesses. And what they say to businesses is that any business that comes into this type of business, because the country had wanted to move in a particular area, they're going to provide funding, they're going to provide, technical support from the academic institutions to help to give businesses the kind of support that they need to start and be sustainable. Of course, other factors came into play because when it relates to product innovation, they would have also linked those businesses with value chain. So they don't have to worry about sales of the products at the end of the day. That kind of economic development funds is also essential. Again, uh, businesses may not know about it. You, as the business consultant, you as a subcontractor, you have to be aware of all of these. So perhaps you might be dealing with a client who's in the similar areas that the government want to focus on in terms of developing the economy in those specific areas. So you now, as the middleman, you now as a subcontractor, can make representation on behalf of your client to ensure that they're sourcing these funds. And this is another way in which you're going to be compensated for the work that you're doing to ensure that the client is accessing capital. Because, of course, as the government roll out these economic development funds, it's going to cover a range of things, not just production, but of course, you might be as a consultancy firm providing, additional market research, providing visibility game plan, which relates to branding and marketing, and there would be budgetary allocation for that type of stuff. So these are all options that are available, and you need to be aware of it, uh, as you're into to business. The last concept that I'm going to give here, and this one is very popular in the United States of America, is the concept that we call the paycheck to the PPP program. Um, we saw that during the global pandemic, what the government rolled out a PPP initiative. Now, what this initiative did, it provided a large sum of monies to companies, which we call the Paycheck Protection Program. So, in spite of the fact that companies was not generating funds, they were still able to keep the door open because the government were paying their staff. And there are many like funds that are set up in the US. So these are things, again, you want to keep your eyes on. Monies was also be made pay available to the consumer because monies are now available to consumer. Consumer spending power was still strong, and business were almost, being done as usual. Of course, taking into consideration, it was a rough period for it to really be normal, but the government played a role in terms of ensuring that um, businesses were still earning, employees who are at work were still being compensated, and so forth. All right, so these are options that are available. And as you look at the pull factors of sales communication, as you look at demographic specific targeting, as you look at your marketability to pay, all of these factors are things that you need to look at as you go deep into your demographic analysis. Now, the last concept that we're going to cover here today, I do believe this is the last one. We're going to be looking at what we call creative financing capital and payment method. Now, here is where you're challenged to be extremely creative. Let us suppose that your business, because it's a new startup, you don't have the historical financial data. You don't have these stuff. All right. You may have a cash flow projection. You may have your business game plan, your cash flow game plan, but you don't have historical financial data. So most financial institutions are not going to want to fund you. And perhaps also in even getting government fund, depending on where you are, they may also be looking at some form of historical data. Let us suppose that you don't have all of this. What other options do you have available? And there are some very innovative consultants that are willing to work with business startup. And what exactly is creative financing capital payment method? The first concept that I want us to look at here is a concept that we're going to call influencers and a strong value proposition sales pitch. Now, what exactly is this? This is what we see collaborative uh, approaches are being used, collaboration fundraiser project. Now, let me give a brief idea as to what this is. You have a client that has a very strong value proposition. You've done the research, you see that there is market demand for the product, but they do not have the capital to go to market. They do not have the capital to build out their branding and visibility game plan. How do you help a client in this particular case? You've worked with them, you know where they are, you want to help them. But you don't want this to be a charity. It's a business. So you want the business to cash flow. So you don't have to identify what is the best payment method that you can use for this particular client. Now, you may have influencers, and influencers are people who are known, like, and trust. The public has confidence, trust, and credibility in the influencers. So, what you're able to do here is to identify the right influencers, and you invite them to endorse the brand. And by simply doing this, a whole lot of possibilities can happen here. All right. When you structure these programs in the right way. All right. I've seen hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars that are being raised simply by leveraging this particular techniques. I've seen it used in real estate projects to fill out stadiums. So it's a powerful tool that can be used when you know what you're doing. As a consultant, you need to have the right connections with the right people to be able to make this type of impact. And again, I've seen hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars being raised. The beauty about leveraging this is that it's not debt equity credit creative financing. It's creative financing, but it's not debt equity credit hard money lending. So what that means is that you are when you raise this type of capital, you have no debt obligation. It's just a financial agreement, a business agreement between the company owner and their value proposition and the influencers. When the income would have been generated, those debts would have been paid off. All monies that you have, eh, you retain it. And all of it now can be pumped back into moving the business forward. So you just use this as a springboard to access capital to move the business forward. You see, in business, you want to be proactive. And instead of being stuck with your vision for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, perhaps the rest of your life, you want to ensure that you have a consultant on your side that can work with you to look at all of these various options to ensure that you're funded. All right. Ensure that you're getting access to capital. All right. You need these type of creative, innovative thinkers around you as you step into doing business. Now, let us look at the second concept here today. And this one, we're going to call it the incentive sales funnel creative financing. The incentive sales funnel creative financing. Now, these are concepts, these are processes, these are techniques that can be used in terms of helping the entrepreneur to access the much needed cash that they need to grow and scale. But what exactly is the incentive sales funnel creative financing? This again is what we're going to call a strong value proposition being built into a sales funnel pitch. Now, for example, you build out a sales funnel, and the sales funnel incentivize persons that join the funnel. All right. It incentivizes the person that joins the funnel. Now, you do this and you do this right. In a short period of time, we can see hundreds or possibly thousands of potential consumers that are joining the funnel. Now, the objective of driving the traffic here is that when you build out the right funnel and it is pitched in the right way, and you are able to attract the right consumers into that funnel, you're able to monetize this entire process. You're able to monetize this entire process. So, in the case of, let us say, you attracted 1,000 persons into the funnel, and you are selling a product, let us suppose, at $1,000, immediately you have $1 million that you are generating through the funnel. These persons can be subscribers to the value proposition, and there's a whole host of other things that you can leverage the cash flow. They can be subscribers, they can become limited partners in an investment portfolio. There is so much of possibilities that are open. The objective here is just to whet your appetite in terms of understanding creative, innovative approaches that can be used when you are serious about cash flow in your business and your brand. And what we looked at today is the pull factors of sales communication and payment method. Now, we have clearly established that in the United States of America alone, we have 32.5 million businesses. Many of those businesses will never do the cost of running a business at the beginning of doing the business. So when it comes to the cost to cover some expenses, they may not have that disposable income to do it. But in spite of this, we don't want to trivialize those businesses because they may have a strong value proposition. As a consultant, who is broad in your thinking, who is on the ground and understand financial instruments, understand how processes works, you can leverage your skill sets to provide strategic intervention to those businesses. And we have looked at not only the traditional financing sources, which is debt, equity, credit, creative finance, and hard money lending. We have also looked at government funding, government support, and we have really did a deep dive into creative financing. So you have all of these options available to you. It's all about your appetite because, of course, there are businesses that will say if you don't have the cash to pay, I don't have the time to be creative and innovative to help you raise funds to then pay me. Um, if that's your appetite, that's totally understood. But there may be entrepreneurs who have relationship, and I keep saying relationship is the mother of all social system. And they may have relationship with influencers, very strong influencers that can literally accelerate the growth of a business. And there's so much, I'm just scratching the surface in terms of how influencers can be leveraged to accelerate a business that is outside of the stress zone. But I'm going to leave it here for today. Today we cover a number of issues on this topic, and just let me do a quick recap. In starting this program, I established that in the United States of America alone, we have 32.5 million small businesses, and they account for approximately 99.9% of businesses in the US. That's a large number. US small business account for about 1.5 million jobs annually. So they are massive creator of jobs. Along with this, we would have established that many of these businesses may not do the due diligence so as to understand the real cost of doing business. But in spite of this, we don't want to trivialize them based on whatever established. They are a major player in the financial space, in the business space in the US, in terms of ensuring that goods and services reach the final consumers. They're a major player in job creation. And of course, starting a business is, a very unique way of building wealth for yourself. So these businesses are not to be trivialized. So with that being said, we have looked at various sources of funding that can be leveraged to help these businesses to reach their full potential. We looked at outside of the company being able to sponsor itself, we look at government sponsored payment method. We look at a number of those methods, and we look at creative finance capital payment method. We also look at a few of these methods that can be used to your advantage when you are attempting to provide strategic intervention to small businesses. So, with that being said, I want to encourage you to, if this program, brings any value to you, I want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and share. I want to encourage you to visit our website, which is pitchdeck101.org. We have two companies established in the US. We have Pitch Deck 101 LLC, and we have 10X B&M LLC out of New York. Go to Pitch Deck and take some time to study what we are doing. We are fully aware that, many businesses get started and you struggle to access capital. And even when you access capital, you struggle to exit that debt portfolio. So we have built out our business ecosystem to provide strategic intervention to businesses so as to ensure that you understand financial instruments, you know how to access these financial portfolios, you know to leverage these portfolios, because it's important to also take the time to understand how to leverage. And along with this, you want to know how to mitigate debt. These type of conversation is not commonplace, But at Pitch Deck 101, it's very common. And of course, we are here to help you, provide you with the information, and ensure that we are transforming the world one business at a time. All right. So with that being said, um, we will do this again in the next broadcast. So like, subscribe, and share. If you know anyone in business and they may have interest in these programs, I do encourage you to share it with them, and so we you can help us to reach more persons in 2023. All right. My name is Gary Thompson. I'm a business development consultant by profession. I'm a humanitarian by nature, and I'm the self published author for several books, including The Psychology of Money and TEDx Branding and Marketing Blueprint, among so many others. Be blessed and see you in the next broadcast.